stage and welcome to this special edition of Power and Politics, Asian American Trailblazers. And in honor of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, we have a powerful panel of top government leaders in the tri-state area. They are all pioneers in their own right. New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal, the first Sikh American Attorney General in U.S. history. His counterpart in Connecticut, Attorney General William Tong, is the first Asian American to be elected to statewide office. New York Congresswoman Grace Meng, who represents Queens and is serving her 5th term. She's the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State. And New Jersey Congressman Andy Kim represents the 3rd Congressional District and is the first Asian American congressman in New Jersey. So thank you all so much for joining us for this important conversation. Let me start by asking about the many anti-Asian hate incidents we've seen this year, an alarming rise. How are you assessing where we are at this moment in this country? I want to start with you, Attorney General Gurbir Grewal.
Well, thanks for having me. And listen, we've always had problems with hate and bias in this country, but what we've seen over the last 4 years is really an unprecedented rise in bias incidents across the country. And it's against all groups. We've seen a rise in anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, and of late, anti-Asian racism and bias incidents. In my own state, we're tracking that national trend and have seen year-over-year increases in such acts. And for those of us, like everyone on this panel, who have been raising the alarm about how the rhetoric of our elected officials can lead to conduct, about how social media companies are not doing enough to police their platforms and allowing bigots to find community, about the rise in white supremacist groups, none of this comes as a surprise to us.
And you know, your counterpart in Connecticut, Attorney General Tong, I'd like you to kind of weigh in. And where do you think we've been? I know you've experienced your share of incidents like this, especially during your campaign.
Yeah, it's not surprising to any of us, frankly. And Ian, what you're referring to is after I won, somebody on the other side of the aisle called me Kim Jong Tong. And if you're an Asian American elected official, this is nothing new, and we experience it all the time. And I guess to a certain extent, we can take it because we're elected officials, but we're really concerned about people, everyday people in our communities across our state who have to contend with this increase, as General Grewal said, in anti-Asian hate and racism and hate and discrimination against a number of communities. And I think the one thing I want to say is that not only is this not new to us, it's not new, period. Do you not know about the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Page Act and the internment of 125,000 Japanese American citizens in camps on American soil?
Congressman Kim, I'd like you to weigh in if you could. I know you've had your share of experiences as well, especially when you were at the State Department.
That's right. When before I became a member of Congress, I worked as a United States diplomat at the United States Department of State. And here was a place where I served my country as a diplomat out in Afghanistan. I had top secret security clearance, yet when I came home back to the States, I found an envelope on my desk that told me I was being banned from working on issues related to Korea just because I'm Korean American. You know, I was born here in the United States. I don't even speak Korean that well. And for my country to basically send me a message saying that they didn't quite trust me 100%, you know, that they worried that if I was working on issues related to my ancestral home of Korea, they worried that I wouldn't be fully loyal to America. And that was a really hurtful message to receive, because this is the only home I've ever known. You know, this is my country. And it felt like they were saying that, that they couldn't fully trust my loyalty. And that's the kind of foreignness that hangs over us. I mean, this year is 50 years since my parents immigrated to this country, 3 generations of us here now, yet we still have that kind of shadow of foreignness hanging over us on so many of the work that we do.
And Congresswoman Meng, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I know this is something you've experienced as well.
I mean, to what my colleagues are saying, I agree with all of them. Asian Americans have largely been portrayed as invisible and silent, or as foreigners and outsiders. There is a history of scapegoating of Asian Americans out of ignorance and fear in this country. A large part of that is also due to the fact that we are largely invisible, whether it's in our history books, whether it is in our budget books, the budgets of government, corporate philanthropy, research, health data. There is so much out there where Asian Americans have not been included. And that's something that I believe we are at a galvanizing moment in our country where we are saying that we are Americans too. We will be invisible no more.
And Congresswoman, just to follow up, I know you've been the direct target of racism many times, and last September you sponsored a non-binding resolution for government leaders to address this anti-Asian hate. And after the House passed that in September, I think it was, your office, congressional office, got a number of racist voicemails. Now, we want to play two of them, and then I want you guys to react. So let's listen to them.
Hey, fat, I'll say what I want. Chinese virus, Chinese virus, Chinese virus, Kung flu, you, Kung flu, you. You don't tell me what to say, you.
I'm calling about the Karate Kid virus, or the Kung Flu virus, or the whatever came from Asia. It's not racist. It's the truth. Filthy people.
Here we are in 2021, and this is what you're getting, and this is what you're hearing.
Well, like A.G. Tong said, we're elected officials. We kind of develop thick skin, but we do worry about everyday people. And that's what happens when leaders who have a very wide platform are very irresponsible and use incendiary language that embolden people who harbor these racist and hateful feelings.
This is no surprise. We've seen time and time again through our country's history that in times of national crisis or when we're under duress, that people are scapegoated at times, and that in particular Asian Americans have been targeted. In my own case, I was driven to public service in a moment much like this one. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, that tragedy, I saw not only a surge of patriotism in this country, which I felt and my family felt, but I also saw the rise in Islamophobia, the rise in violent acts against South Asians, people who look like me. I saw people who look like me being killed in Mesa, Arizona. The message that the Congresswoman received, it breaks my heart. And when you normalize the rhetoric, what comes next? The conduct. We engage our political leaders. We tell them when they're speaking out of line, when their words are not right, and when that they're going to lead to hateful acts. We have to call it out when we hear it. And all of the panelists on this program this evening have been doing that precisely because we see where it can lead.
That's another good point. And you talk about reaching out to communities and educating, because so much of this is based in ignorance and intolerance. And then Connecticut has actually already taken steps to reach out to communities where English may be the second language. So I want you guys to listen to a PSA that the Attorney General Tong's office recently released, and then we'll talk about that.
My name is Sean Yan. I'm a supervisory special agent with the FBI. បើមានគេធ្វើបាបយើង ពួកខ្ញុំចង់ដឹងទាំងអស់
我们需要您的举报
我们要知道 victim of a hate crime we want to know call your local police or call 1-800-CALL-FBI.
Yeah, I had to do my bit in Mandarin, and I'm glad Congresswoman Meng wasn't watching, because she would have been very critical and laughed at my poor Mandarin. But it's really important to reach out to people, particularly people in immigrant communities that may not have longevity of experience with and relationships with law enforcement. People that may be concerned, even if they have nothing to worry about, Congressman Kim, they still might be concerned that if they report and engage with police or FBI, that somehow they'll draw unwanted scrutiny or that their immigration status will be challenged. It is deeply hurtful to be otherized in your own country, in your own land, to be questioned. I'm routinely accused of being an agent of the Chinese Communist Party. I've been called the Manchurian AG. I was born in America, Jack. I was born in Hartford Hospital, and I'm as American as anybody else.
Congressman Kim, yeah. I wanted to get your thoughts on, so many of it impacted by the shootings in Atlanta, and how how devastating that was, and your thoughts on that, and how you can relate to that, that could have been someone that you could have known.
Yeah, Grace, Meg, and I actually went down to Atlanta just 2 weeks after the shootings, and I'm sure Grace feels the same way, but that was one of the most powerful experiences of my career. To go down there when the emotions were so raw, and we visited the three sites of the shootings, we followed the path that the shooter took, really seeing full force that this was someone who was specifically deliberately targeting, and going out of his way to target Asian-owned businesses. That was just, it really brought it to life. And I remember we talked to the victims' families, and they talked about, just their mothers, the children of these victims talked about their mothers, their love for cooking, Korean food and the kimchi and all of that. Just they used these words as if it was, my own parents, and talked about how hard their family worked to be able to provide for them. It was a lot. And I remember they specifically asked, like, what are you going to do? Like, we just experienced this violence. What are you going to do? And, Grace and I, we looked at each other, and we're just, we're going to do everything we can. But what we know is that there's no single piece of law that we can write in Congress that's just going to get rid of this violence and keep our families safe. We can take steps that'll hopefully give us more tools. But, this is a deep wound in our country.
I'm in my 40s, and it took recent events and a trip to Atlanta and conversations with the families of the victim to finally make me realize that I, as an Asian American, don't need to play defense with my history and my background, which is something that I feel like I've been doing my whole life. The victims and their stories truly made me appreciate the contributions of Asian Americans to this country, and truly made me recognize fully that our history is just as American as anyone else's. And just because we don't see it in the history books, just because we don't always see ourselves in the media, in the movies, and we don't get adequate funding for our communities, that's where we have to strive to do better.
When we return, our panel of trailblazers will open up about the next generation, how they approach the topic of anti-Asian hate with their own kids.
No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, their religion, their background. They must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love.
Welcome back to this special edition of Power and Politics, Asian American Trailblazers. Let's continue the conversation now with our powerful panel of top government leaders in our tri-state in honor of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Former cabinet member Elaine Chao under Presidents both Trump and Bush recently talked to us here at News 12 about the Asian American journey from her perspective. So I want to listen to this and then get your thoughts on it.
When I first came to America, Asian Americans comprise less than 1% of the national population. We are now 6.7%. We're the fastest growing minority group in America today. There needs to be policymakers.
So one thing I want to talk about here is, and I always talk about this, having a seat at the table and having someone who is diverse be at the table where decisions are made. And I want to start with you, A.G. Tong, because I know that your leadership in the Attorney General's office is extremely diverse, and I know that was important to you. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think we don't often think about why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. So many of us personally, and so many of us in our communities and our families have a target on our backs. And representation, it matters so much. And that's why a majority of my senior staff are women, and half are people of color. And I've made a really concerted effort to do that, because as we discuss civil rights, criminal justice reform, gun violence, it's important to have the voices of all communities at the table. And in my head, while as Attorney General, I'm making decisions about how we're going to allocate law enforcement resources and what we're going to focus on. I was very fortunate. General Graywall and I led a national convening on Tuesday, led by state attorneys general. Congresswoman Meng participated, about anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander hate. And I can tell you that unless there were Asian American AGs, that wouldn't have ever happened, right? But because of Gerbir and Rob Bonta and Sean Reyes, a Republican from Utah, right, and Levan Camacho and me and others, because we're there, this conversation is happening, and we were coming up with real solutions and actions to confront these issues.
Yeah, that's definitely a seat at the table. Now let's look forward to the next generation. I mean, you guys are you all have young children, and so let me start with you, maybe AG Graywall. How do you talk to your kids about racism and what you have faced and where we move forward and how do we move forward? How do you talk to your young kids about this and where we are?
Well, it's certainly difficult. I mean, my girls, I have 3, 12, 10, and 8, and they're old enough to listen to the news, read the paper. I had my own experiences in the state when I was targeted by a particular radio station that decided to call me Turban Man and said it wasn't worth remembering my name unless I lose my article of faith.
You know, the Attorney General, the guy, I'm never going to know his name. I'm just going to say the guy with the turban.
Okay.
The new Attorney General?
Turban Man.
Yeah, Turban Man. Hey, you know, listen, and if that offends you, then don't wear the turban, man. I'll remember your name.
And my kids read all that. And so my approach with them, my wife's approach with them, is to have open and honest dialogues with them and talk to them about the importance of treating everyone they interact with respect. Those wounds cut. And so it's important for me to teach my young daughters not to ever act in that way and to treat others with respect. Hate is a learned behavior. And you know, Nelson Mandela powerfully said that no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, their religion, their background. They must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. And so that's what we're doing in our house. That's what we're doing in my state, because we have a youth bias task force that our governor convened. We're going into our schools to teach an anti-bias curriculum because that's where we're investing our resources to prevent this from taking hold in our young people.
You know, and I know that Congressman Kim, I know if we can pull it up, I know we have a tweet from you, which was actually a kind of a poignant moment about you and your son. You know, when you talked about your 5-year-old had come home and asked why some bigger kid was calling him Chinese boy, and he was confused because he was from New Jersey. And I know that must have been a difficult moment for you. You talked about, you know, it was kind of emotional. So can you talk about that?
It was a tough moment. You know, hearing my son talk about what was potentially his first encounter with understanding race and understanding, you know, bias and you know, he's such a sweet kid. You know, he said, like, you know, I'm not a Chinese boy, I'm a New Jersey boy is what he said. And it's just so sweet because but he didn't understand what was happening. Right. And for me as a father, I'll be honest, I was unprepared in terms of what to talk to him about. I just, you know, my parents never really had a conversation with me about this, and I don't think I just was prepared. So I've been struggling to try to understand how to conceptualize it. Again, he's only 5 years old. The way I've sort of talked about it with my wife and what we're trying to do is, you know, first of all, start with a sense of pride. We're trying to teach him about our family history, about API history, about just great role models and, you know, people that we looked up to in the API community. We want it to come from a source of pride. We don't want his first understandings of being Asian American to be one of fear and anxiety and discrimination. 2, you know, we want him to understand some of the challenges that come with this and some of the words that might be used and other things like that. So that's something that we plan to talk to him about down the road. And then 3, we want to make sure that he understands that about the pain of others and the struggle of others, that we not only look out for people that look like us, but we look out for everybody. We stand up against hate in all forms.
Next, our panelists talk about the wisdom of their own parents. Welcome back to this special edition of Power and Politics, Asian American Trailblazers. What's the best piece of advice you got from your parents?
My parents have always shown me how to lean into who we are and who I am.
To be honest, I really don't feel like I had these conversations with my parents. What I try to tell young people nowadays is my version of leaning in, and it's knowing your worth and understanding your value that you bring to a table. You know, I spent so much of my childhood and probably even adulthood sort of playing defense.
You know, it's the lessons my grandmother taught me when she was raising me while my parents worked, to be proud of my Sikh heritage, and that my Sikh tradition teaches me to fight injustice wherever I see it, to really root out injustice, and that's from that's how my faith was born.
The opposite of feeling foreign is to be loved by a community. And that, like, if we want to not feel that sense of foreignness, if we want to combat that, it's about investing in family, investing in community, and really bringing that out to the forefront and recognizing that you're not alone.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just can't thank you enough for the time, you guys. We don't have enough time to really get through all of these topics and get to all of your insight and your wisdom, but I appreciate the time, and it's a very difficult and important topic, so I appreciate your taking the time to talk about it with us. Our viewers appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you to all our panelists for your personal insight and thoughts today, and that's all for this special edition of Asian American Trailblazers. I'm Ian Page.